Hi, good you're here. I am so excited. Guess what? I hope this isn't about your podcast again. Why, did you finally listen to it?
Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. The Groomer Next Door Production. You're listening to BYOTP Radio. Coming up next, the Groomer Next Door. The Groomer Next Door Podcast.
Dun, 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 dun.
Hello, Pups and Kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of The Groomer Next Door. I'm your host, Chris Green. This is episode 175, with special guest, Dr. Stacey Bone, answering your questions that you were kind enough to actually submit to us. Let's go into the fact of the week. The term veterinarian comes from the Latin word veterinae, which means working animals. Figured that was a real good fact of the week, considering our guest is a veterinarian. And a good one. A very good one. Another thing about Dr. Bone that we were unable to actually get to is his great product called Pawfriction. Now, Dr. Bone was on the podcast back on episode 155, so you can go back and listen to all about Pawfriction because we ran out of time, unfortunately. But don't worry, everybody. Dr. Bone will be back on the podcast probably very soon because we ran out of time, and it was kind of fun because we just kept going and going and going and realized, oh my gosh, we have so much to go over again, and we ran out of time. But no big deal, he will be back. So again, thank you to all of you for submitting these great questions, and without further ado, Dr. Stacey Bone DVM.
So you want to be a veterinarian? Well, the getting there is slow. A whole lot of school to learn, the things you gotta know. We're going to call on our friends, the skeletons, and name these bones one by one. Oh, forget it. Let's just ask Dr. Stacey Bone instead.
All right, returning to the podcast is our good friend, Dr. Stacey Bone. You've all been seeing the posting that he was going to be on the podcast answering your questions. Thank you, Dr. Bone, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited. This is interesting.
You know, and it's so funny. You know, obviously we have this long conversation before we start, and then we realize, oh wait, we need to actually record the podcast.
Right? Yeah, I lost all my pearls of wisdom. Now we're done.
Well, actually, no. That was you caught me off guard a few times in that, so that was great. All right, so let's go into the mailbag. As I'm gonna kind of make that paper sound. I don't know if you can hear it on that end. So anyway.
I can, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So I say, you know, this first one actually came, I think it's coming from India. I didn't get a chance to actually look the person up, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. So I was really hopeful to get a good answer on this. But your answer, we were talking about this before we started, your answer was actually similar to what I was. So I was like, oh, thank God I'm not too off. All right, so here's the question. I want to ask about, and I'm just going to say parakeet. You knew the right terminology for it, and it was, what was it?
A budgery. Budgery.
All right, budgery, or a parakeet.
Right. So funny story about that, actually, and I don't want to derail the podcast.
Nope, you're fine.
So back in the day, when I was taking my veterinary boards like a decade ago, I got about halfway through my veterinary boards before I realized that word, because budgery is spelled so ridiculously different than how it's said, that I answered every one of those questions wrong. Until finally there was a picture of a little bird next to the word. I'm like, holy cow, that's a budgery. And I felt like the biggest idiot. So don't feel bad.
Well, okay.
It tripped me up too, and this is what I do for a living. So.
Budgery
Budgerigar. Where does budgery come out of that? Oh my gosh.
Welcome to language. It's miserable.
Language. This is language. Hashtag language.
Right.
I am facing a problem. When the chick is ready to come out of the box, they lost their ability to fly. They lost their flying feathers. After a few months, it flew off them, or fell off of them, recovered. Is there any medication with formulation which I can find in my country? And like I said, I think this is India. And the answer, doctor?
Well, and I'll be honest with you. So, avian medicine or bird medicine is really kind of a specialty in and of itself. I know some cursory information on this. It can take a long time for the flight feathers to grow back. It sounds like there was probably some sort of a hair follicle damage or stress or anything like that can come back. You know, we trim flight feathers in a lot of birds. But I think that giving medication to make them regrow probably isn't anything out there that would help with that. Most of the time, you're kind of looking at time. However, with that being said, you know, take that kind of at a grain of salt because there's a lot more people out there with a lot more education about the avian medicine than what I have. But that's kind of my cursory knowledge of that. So I would have to say I don't think there's anything you can give medication-wise that's going to help those feathers to regrow. You may just have to wait it out.
And see, that when I read it originally, we spoke about this before, you know, I know that they molt, and I know that, again, you can trim their actual flight feathers, and they do grow back. And I remember my mom had a parakeet way back when I was a little smurf. So I don't remember much about it, but I remember they would get trimmed, and I don't remember the duration of how long it takes for them to regrow, but it seemed like it was a few months at least.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, generally, if I remember right, from clipping feathers, I mean, it can take 4 to 6 weeks just to grow after they've been clipped. Now, I mean, the concern would be is that if there's, like, irreparable damage to the actual hair follicle itself, it may not grow back, or they may grow back slightly abnormal, and that's not unusual either. It's kind of like a fingernail that you lose may or may not ever grow back depending on the damage that you do to it. So I think in that respect, I mean, this is hair follicle stuff, and man, if you could figure out a medication to give to grow hair, you'd be a multi-billionaire in the United States, because there's enough people going bald that we would pay any amount of money on the planet. But unfortunately for this kind of stuff, I just don't think that there's anything to actually regrow the hair. You just got to wait it out.
All right. The next question. My Shih Tzu has trouble with her back knees and has been limping. Is it safe to give her baby aspirin for the discomfort? And this comes from Sharon.
Great. So, yeah, this is a really, really, really common question. So there's a yes and a no answer to this, so if that's confusing at all. So aspirin can be given to dogs. It's a bit of a misconception that it can't be given, but it's easier for veterinarians to tell you, no, don't give it, because it has some issues. So aspirin long-term can cause changes to the way the platelets work in the blood. And so platelets are, of course, what you use to clot blood. So giving a dose of aspirin for too long can actually cause platelet issues. And to be honest with you, I mean, we've all been there. Aspirin's kind of a pretty cruddy pain medicine all around. Anymore, you know, we reach for stronger anti-inflammatories to take care of problems. The issue with it is that with our veterinary patients, we can't give any other over-the-counter pain medicine. So ibuprofen and all of those, I mean, they cause serious issues in dogs. So in short term, we have had people use aspirin. You know, long term, it's probably better to go with one of the veterinary-approved anti-inflammatories. And of course, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I said, you know, make sure you consult consult your veterinarian before you give any medications over the counter, just as the general blanket statement. But you can give baby aspirin at the correct dose, but long term, there's way better drugs out there that are going to help.
And you know what? I have nothing to add to this. And this comes from me actually saying I can never stop talking, and I have nothing.
Right. Well, the other thing, and this is really, really, really important, is don't ever discount joint supplements. So, my own dog, I have a almost 14-year-old Jack Russell Terrier who's had, it's a Shih Tzu, so there's a high likelihood that the problem with it is a luxating kneecap. There are tons and tons and tons of joint supplements out there on the market. The better part of them are kind of iffy, but there are a couple like Cosequin and Dosequin, not to name drop or drop brands, and they're not paying me or anything. I wish they were, but they're readily available, very inexpensive, and a slew of other ones that can make a huge difference in the mobility of some of these animals when they're dealing with joint problems.
And you said something that made me laugh a little bit whenever I drop the name of a product, and I go, and they're not sponsoring me, so this really doesn't help.
If they're listening and they would like to, I'm more than willing to accept their money. But no, it's just we kind of deal with, and I'll give you kind of in Missouri. This is kind of the rules and regulations. So I guess you want to loop them into like holistic products, but supplemental products and things like that really aren't governed by the FDA or anything along those lines. So I kind of joke with my clients that I can go outside and pick up good old Missouri clay and put it in a bottle, and as long as I tell you that it's Missouri clay, I can pretty much make any claim that I want to, and nobody can stop me, as terrifying as that is. So I can be like, here's some clay, put it in your dog's water, and it's going to cure cancer, and at the end of the day, I don't have to prove that actually works. It's kind of terrifying to think about in some respects, but like Cosequin and Dosequin have gone through a little bit of extra work to prove that their products are absorbed appropriately, safe, and approved by the FDA. So that's the reason why I just picked those two off the top of my head.
And you've obviously been to other places. You've lived in Vegas, so you kind of have a little bit more of a broader spectrum. It is definitely the Midwest that has yet to adopt to the East or the West and see all of the positives, I guess you could say, that come with it, including, like you said, just making random claims, and it's kind of acceptable. And I have not figured that out yet.
Right. All we need is In-N-Out Burger. If they could just move that into the Midwest, I would just figure that we'd be kind of at least point into the 21st century.
And you know what? I again, we're gonna completely, and you know how I am. I go completely off the rails all the time. I have been saying this for the longest time. I miss In-N-Out Burger more than anything out there. And I actually heard years ago Springfield was going to get one, but no, that didn't happen. Yeah, I miss that. I would love. What a perfect night for here. I mean, Missouri loves, their religion, and what better fast food than an In-N-Out Burger?
Right. Well, I was exposed to this place called Raising Cane. Have you ever eaten at Raising Cane?
I haven't.
So all they make is chicken fingers, and I found out about them in Vegas actually, and they have this awesome sauce that goes along with it. Anyway, they just opened one up literally about 45 feet from my front door. So I'm gaining like 20 pounds, and I'm just somebody's gonna have to roll me up there.
Here's the problem: I don't eat any kind of beef anymore, so I would actually have to, lift that band and actually go back to my beef to have my In-N-Out Burger. So I'd be kind of
right.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for that question. I hope that Dr. Bone was able to answer your question. I mean, I had nothing more to add to that. I'm sorry to say. I agreed with what you said, but of course I'm going to agree with everything you say because, well, you're a doctor. I only play one on a podcast.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I think that there's something to be said, though, for people in all walks of our industry, because everybody kind of has their own expertise to add to this. And, I think veterinary medicine needs to become a little bit more like human medicine in the respect that, now they're taking into account things like acupuncture and chiropractic medicine and physical therapy and, estheticians and things like that. I mean, so, why for years and years and years the veterinarian is just considered like the sole expert, I think needs to change a little bit, to be honest with you. And so I think you guys have valuable opinions about things that I could never even answer. So, I think that hopefully as we, move forward that, more and more and more of the veterinary industry, you see people kind of start to embrace all walks of life, from, breeders to, to groomers to physical therapists, rehabilitation, all that kind of stuff that we're getting in veterinary medicine now. Because I mean, kumbaya moment, but I think we all have to work together for the health of the animal.
It would be nice. I mean, it would be nice. I mean, that's in a perfect world, yes. That would be the perfect one.
Right.
All right, our next question is actually something I really kind of love this, because I've heard this a couple times. We actually had a person come by asking about I want to say it was one of our cats for adoption a while back ago, and it's very similar to this, except this is going to be for a puppy. I will be picking up my my brand new puppy in a few weeks. She will have her first set of shots. I am a truck driver, and I'm worried about parvo because we will be traveling all across the country to truck stops and rest areas. Will the first set of puppy shots keep her safe, or what do I need to do? And this is from Lana.
Yeah, that is an awesome question. So there's no easy answer to this. And I guess before we kind of dive into the actual answer to the question, let me kind of first give you guys a little bit of a brief rundown of why we vaccinate when we do. Okay, so if you kind of look at immunity in puppies, there's this thing called maternal immunity, right? Which is immunity that is passed from the mother down to the child, or in this case from the down to the puppy, right? And maternal immunity, believe it or not, varies on when it drops off in almost every breed of animal. From for instance, black and tan dogs have been scientifically proven to have a maternal immunity that lasts much longer than any other breed. So Rottweilers and hounds and things like that, they have a tendency for immunity to last quite a bit longer versus a myriad of other dogs that go shorter. Why? We have no clue. So basically kind of the way that it works is that really, as far as your quote-unquote puppy vaccines, we go by the standards that are put forth by this governing body called AHA, which stands for the American Association of Hospital Administration, if I get that right. I may be wrong. But they do a lot of research into vaccines and protocols and things of that nature. And you're welcome to, if anybody listening wants to look that up, it's got a wealth of information that goes along with it. But basically what happens is that the standard dog will taper off or drop their maternal immunity at about 10 weeks or so. So they recommend a vaccine between 10 and 12 weeks and 14 and 16 weeks. Okay? And that's your quote-unquote for real puppy vaccine. Any vaccines that are given before 10 weeks of age, and that varies depending on the clinic, the veterinarian, the exposure risks, and things like that, are given in about every 2 weeks. And so a lot of this depends on what the age of your puppy is whenever you get it. So if you have a puppy that's over 10 weeks of age, a vaccine is more likely to be protective because you're actually stimulating their exact immune system. If you have a younger dog, it may or may not protect them. Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
Okay.
But I'm not. I hope I'm not speaking too much for our listeners. But it makes sense to me. I'm just not. I'm hoping it makes sense to everybody.
Well, let me, so I'll summarize and actually answer her question. So let's go on this number. If you have a puppy that's less than 10 weeks of age, my recommendation would be about every 2 weeks to booster that parvovirus vaccine, just in the off chance that maternal immunity drops off, okay? And then definitely get the 10 to 12 week and the 14 to 16 week as that, like, quote-unquote end-all be-all protection of parvovirus. Now, again, with that being said, the best offense is a good defense. So as a truck driver, picking areas where there's not a lot of other dogs to walk the puppy or to go to the bathroom is very important. So if you go to a rest stop where there's like a communal area of animals, stay away from that. Go off on your own and try to avoid any contact with feces or any area that could be contaminated by a whole lot of other puppies. Because to be honest with you, I don't worry about her puppy because she's asking this question, so it's a genius question, right? So I have a feeling that puppy will be totally fine. It's the hundreds of other puppies out there that haven't received vaccines or people don't quite know exactly where to go or what to do that are going to cause you the problem.
And see, one thing that I felt the same way, and the only thing that I was thinking of, and I'm not going to actually give the idea out of the vaccination because I think I'm wrong, but for kennel cough, that would be something else I'd be, concerned with, just in case, like you said, if there are dogs that are walking around. I mean, we all know that kennel cough is just the common cold for dogs. So, right. My thought is, what was the vaccination? Because I'm not sure if I was right on it, and I didn't want to say it out loud if I'm wrong.
So Bordetella.
Thank you.
Basically, is the vaccine. Now that's given at a number of different ages based on exposure risk and things of that nature. So, like particularly at my clinic, we usually do it about 10 weeks of age. Okay. But I don't think that there's a right or wrong necessarily on that because Bordetella is a bacteria. You don't need a lot of viral. The reason why we give multiple vaccines is just basically because we want the immune system to build a tolerance to it, or to build a stimulation so the immune system knows how to protect it.
And see, I was thinking, if the dog is exposed to large areas with dogs, like you had said, if there is that ability, and obviously not all pet parents are diligent when it comes to this stuff. So I was thinking, oh boy, that would be one of my big concerns I would have. And just in case, for instance, they, being at their cross country, maybe they want to board at a facility for a night. Maybe they're going to stay at a hotel or, go to a theme park. I think Bordetella, is actually standard now on almost every boarding facility to actually have that vaccination when you actually bring your dogs in, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of places have flipped to the influenza as well. The flu vaccine that we kind of did the outbreak out of Chicago. So yeah, I would say, and this is kind of what I tell people. Even in the older dogs, Bordetella is a pretty easy vaccine on the system, especially if you use the intranasal or the oral form of it. It doesn't cause a whole body reaction or anything along those lines, but young dogs and older dogs can be debilitated by kennel cough and the myriad of other types of respiratory agents that you can get. So sometimes it's better to just go ahead and protect them because you don't want to fight kennel cough pneumonia or something along those lines. So always your best offense is a good defense.
Right. And even at the other thing, even if they're not going to board, maybe they will stop at a dog park all over the place. And, that's again, a breeding ground. So I was like, oh boy, these are things I wanted to, definitely, like I said, I never know when to shut up and definitely chiming in. I wanted to,
Right. Well, you guys see the kennel. You guys see the kennel cough side of things because I'm sure there's been multiple times where a dog has walked in your door and is sitting in the back of one of the kennels, and you can just hear that harsh, raspy cough, and you think to yourself, "Oh man, this is not something we wanted to deal with," and all of a sudden, all these other dogs could be infected. It's just like a daycare. I mean, you put all these animals and puppies and stuff together, and all of a sudden they're just kicking those bacteria and those viruses back and forth to one another super easily.
I'm so grateful to say we never went through any of that in the grooming side. I do know that there had been different stories of kennels. I mean, you've heard the same thing, especially with all of that going on. We didn't see any even in the kennel that's adjacent to the business, but I know that places, even right up here, I know that they had to see it. There had to be. You couldn't run from that too much. We were lucky, but I mean, I know for a fact if we would have seen a customer come in who had it, we would have definitely sent them home, just for the welfare of all the other dogs. And it is really easy to detect what kennel cough is. Very simple, like you said, hacking cough, no big deal. All right. Well, thank you, Lana, for that question. I knew we would have quite a lot to go on with that one. All right. Yeah. Next question. If my dog has diarrhea, can I give it Pepto-Bismol?
The short answer, no. So Pepto-Bismol doesn't really help too much for a number of reasons. And then let me give you some ideas of things that you can use. I'm not just going to blanketly say no.
I like that no.
Right, it'd be a lot quicker that way. We'd be done in about 10 minutes. But Pepto-Bismol, it kind of has a couple of things. So one, it has salicylic acid in it, right, which is aspirin. So you don't take aspirin typically on an upset belly, right? And Pepto-Bismol is really for upper GI problems. We typically take it for, upset belly, bloating, things along those lines. It can help with diarrhea, but it's not super great. And the other thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is giving Pepto-Bismol tablets actually show up on x-ray. And so let's say that your dog has a little bit of diarrhea and you actually want to give that at home, and you give the pills. Well, the pills aren't broken down really well, and then your dog all of a sudden is much sicker and not eating and things like that, and you go in and they take x-rays. There's a possibility that those could mask a foreign body, they could act like a foreign body, or look like a foreign body on the x-ray. So we tend to tell people to stay away from that. So I'll tell you one of the best things in the world for diarrhea. Now, there's my criteria for people when I see them in clinic on whether or not I consider diarrhea to be serious. So, serious diarrhea is that blowout, watery stuff. We've all been there. Everybody on this podcast probably has an animal and has dealt with that kind of loose stool and things of that nature, that watery blowout diarrhea. That typically can't be handled with over-the-counter medications, or if your dog is lethargic, not eating, getting dehydrated, things of that nature, vomiting, any of that kind of stuff, then I don't think an over-the-counter medicine will help. But, like the loose stool, I changed my dog's food, or they went into the groomer and they got a little bit of loose stool and they came home and it's like, man, I'm so tired of dealing with this. One of the best weapons on the planet, and something I tell every single person to have in their home stash of medications, is a can of canned pumpkin. That stuff is amazing. So canned pumpkin is pure fiber, and it's roughly a tablespoon per 10 pounds. Dogs absolutely love the taste. I have no idea why. But they love that stuff, and it will stop loose stool faster than just about anything on the planet. And it's much safer because it's not medication; it's just fiber. So if your dog is eating and just having a little bit of loose stool, even puppies sometimes, you can give them that pumpkin, and within 10 hours, it's like totally done. So, one of the best weapons on the planet versus things like Pepto or Imodium or things of that nature.
Does that work on cats too?
It does, yeah, if they'll eat it. The other thing that we've used with really good success is Metamucil in cats. Metamucil is a teaspoon per 10 pounds. Diarrhea. Now, cats are cats are a whole different species. Mm-hmm. Their diarrhea is actually typically more food sensitivity, which is probably like a whole topic of conversation for another day. And they tend to need diet changes if they're having chronically loose stools and things of that nature. They don't get like the stress colitis and stuff like that as often as dogs do. Dogs look at a Pop-Tart the wrong way and they're going to have diarrhea. So it's kind of one of those things that in those uncomplicated cases of a dog that's bouncing off the walls, eating great, but just having some loose stool, pumpkin can definitely help things out. Certainly long-term loose stool, probably need to take it up with your vet, just because there are some other issues and tweaks you can do that could take care of it really easily.
No argument here. I mean, you actually don't know about the story. I'll be brief and quick. But we have a pit bull that we rescued, and had terrible loose stool, but it turned out it had E. coli poisoning. So that changed a lot of difference. But this poor dog, it's been through the ringer, and I'm thinking, I wonder if the pumpkin would have actually worked for
Yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And for whatever reason, they love it. I have people put pills in pumpkin, and they eat it like crazy. It's just one of the things, and a lot of times in older animals, the ones that are either dropping stool or they're having issues getting outside, bulking up the stool can help them, like to actually get outside or feel the need to go to the bathroom. So it's actually a quote-unquote prescription that I use in a lot of older animals too. I say, fiber up, let's see what happens, see if that can, help the system out a little bit. It's healthy for the colon, just like, older people, and fiber.
I never thought about it. Then again, you're the doctor. I only play one on this podcast.
Great. It's old school, though. I'll be honest with you. I learned that from the two heads of the practice of the first clinic that I worked at. That between the two of them, they've been practicing, 75 years or so. That's a weapon that they were like, day number one, they talked to us about it. Sure enough, it works, and it continues to work very, very, very well.
Interesting. Well, thank you, Laura, for that question. And, I've heard the Pepto-Bismol thing a few times, and never actually heard the pumpkin pie filling.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the anecdote that I saw when I was in practice at one point. These people who came in because their dog had an ear infection, and we walked into the room and we lifted the ear, and there was Pepto-Bismol down inside the dog's ear, and they had said, well, it soothes the stomach, so we have to assume it would soothe the ear. It didn't. There's a lot of things like that out there, so best to just be safe and not use that kind of stuff if you can avoid it.
I had one person ask the question, why are pet parents why are some, not all, why are some pet parents or even people who love animals so stupid? Well, I'll be honest with you. I think that everybody does it with the best of intentions. There's a lot of misinformation out there in the world, and the internet gives us access to a lot of that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, it doesn't take too much for that to spread from one to another. And that information is all of a sudden out into the interwebs, and everybody, can pick it up so easily. But I do think that ultimately, we laugh about that kind of stuff because you just do. But I think that everybody has the best intentions at heart with it. I just think sometimes that our intentions kind of mask maybe common sense, to put it as nicely as I possibly can. I'll say it this way. There are just some real dum-dums out there that just really drive me nuts. I'm willing to go on record for that one.
You're allowed to say that. I am not.
I don't know if I'm allowed to. You know what? I guess
it's your podcast. You can do what you want.
I was just looking at the producer, and he says it's okay, and the producer's me, so I guess I'm good.
Good.
The next question. Now, this one, I had a long conversation with this person about this, and obviously, I'm asking you the question, and all opinions are welcome, as I always say. So I'm always going to be kind of curious. His question is, what is your position on cat declawing?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'll be honest with you. That's changing a lot, and I think that the prevailing theory now is really, unless it's a situation where that animal maybe life is in question, that declawing anymore is really not considered standard of practice. And I think it's getting there. I mean, if you look at New York, they just recently outlawed it. All of Europe has outlawed it. The problem, I think, a lot of times is that the alternatives, whether it be trimming the nails or scratching posts or even those soft paws, like the caps that are on there, are started way too late. It's actually relatively easy to trim a cat's nails, believe it or not, if you do it to them from day one of their life. You know what I'm saying? You know this as much as I do, and you could probably speak to this better, but if you start doing something to a cat at 3 years of age because you just now decided you wanted to trim the nails or brush the teeth or, even groom them for whatever reason, they're going to resist and they're going to fight to the death. So I think that, with all opinions and things like that, you always have to say that opinions have a best by date. And I will tell you that I have done them early in my career. I don't do them much anymore, if hardly at all. Basically because it's not an issue that's brought up anymore. And in situations where people have like immunosuppressive diseases or they're elderly people or things like that, we have really in-depth conversations with the people before we move forward with doing the procedure. And it's done typically with a laser. It is done, not the old method, which is where they would just kind of cut the claws off. They're disarticulated at the third joint there, and then excessive pain meds that are used after the fact. And we really only like to do those in young animals. It's been the rare occasion over the decade that I've been doing this that we've had to do it in an older animal, and it's basically because the people love them, and a lot of people argue, well, if you love your cat, why would you do that to them? But in some cases, unfortunately, there are situations where people are undergoing chemotherapy or they have advanced immunosuppressive diseases or things like that, where it's actually very dangerous to have a clawed cat around the house. But we don't do that nonchalantly. It's not like, oh, another declaw, here we go. I will tell you that it used to be, even 5 years ago, it used to be that we would do maybe one of those every week. I can't tell you the last time I did a declaw. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, a lot of people, what they don't understand is, you explain the actual procedure, and then it's the recovery is just very difficult. And then, down to the special litter. You can't just put them in Tidy Cat and say, here, have at it.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing that people don't get. I was telling this person, and thank you, Brian, for this email. I really did appreciate it. As I told him, all of the cats that we see, that we foster, we rescue, part of the requirements that any pet parent who wants to adopt the cats is you are not allowed to declaw them. Period.
Yeah.
No ands, ifs, or buts. It is against our regulations. And, we've had people come to us and they go, well, can we get them declawed? No. I mean, literally, I really don't even want to even think about special circumstances because, let's be realistic. Not all vets, I think I even said this the last time you were on, not all vets graduate top of their class. So you're going to get some botched jobs. And that poor cat, I mean, it suffers. The pain really never does seem to go away. And I know you've seen this probably firsthand, where you'll notice them kind of pushing their paw down, biting their area, their paw, and you just kind of go, oh man. So I didn't even ask you about that before. I'm sorry. I should have,
Oh no, because I think that. But I mean, it's something that I wouldn't tell a client who came in tomorrow with a kitten. And I have talked many, many people out of that procedure by telling them, listen, let me show you how to trim the nails. It's so easy, and people, a lot of times they see the scruff, which you're very familiar with, the scruff. Mm-hmm. And they see that and they say to themselves, oh, you're hurting the cat. No. That plays off a natural instinct, when they're carried by their mother, mm-hmm. By the scruff of the neck to go basically limp. And there's actually even, devices out there that look like chip clips that you can put on the back of the neck that allow you to do everything to them. It doesn't hurt the cat at all. And, and I tell clients all the time, I say, if I never do another declaw, and I prefer not to, if I never do another one the rest of my career, I will be totally happy. All you have to do is one time in your career, have to do surgery on a cat that had a botched declaw. And that happens. I have a good friend who actually works for the Humane Society in Indiana. And she posts regularly pictures, radiographs of these cats that have leftover digits. They left a bone behind. And you have to think to yourself how miserably painful that has to be for those cats. And, you do that one time, and I think it changes your opinion on how the declaw procedure works. And try to avoid it at all costs. I still will tell you that I still see one or two cases where there's a probable reason to need to do it, but in those cases, you really have to have that conversation with the owner and say, this is what you're doing, could fundamentally change things. We're going to try the best we can to make this painful. Is it worth it to you to do this versus rehoming your cats? And ultimately they kind of make that decision. And I know a lot of places, a lot of veterinary clinics, I'm an associate, so I don't have this luxury to make that decision, but a lot of clinics are not even doing it anymore. There's quite a few in St. Louis, particularly, that are saying, hey, we don't do this anymore. You'll have to go somewhere else or whatever. And I think that's becoming the prevailing view. So fortunately, in the next 5 years, I think this will be a non-issue. I don't think it'll be done anymore.
I agree. I actually really agree because, it's in a sense, it's barbaric medicine. And we all know that there's a lot of, even with human, there's some things that, it's like there's got to be a better way.
Right. Well, and I think that needs to go along the ways of, and this is probably, I'm probably going to get calls from veterinarians all over, they're probably ear cropping and tail docking needs to go that same way. It's one of those things that there's really not, and people argue, well, it helps with ear infections, but in reality, that's not the case. I see ear infections in dogs who have cropped ears all the time. That's not the case. So I think all that kind of just needs to disappear.
Personally, I've always seen cropping of the ears. I've always seen it as people doing it as I hate to say it, but as a fashion statement. And that's the only reason why they do it. I know that there's probably other reasons, but that's the only reason that I think people really do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think ultimately, I've worked for a couple of veterinarians that did ear croppings. They were very good at it, but people would come in and they would have pictures and they say, I want my dog to look like this, or I want it to look like this. And pit bull terriers are a very common cropped ear dog. And they want either they have these, I don't even know the names of them, but they have various different cropping styles across the board because they want a physical appearance out of their animal. And those, I think that all needs, because again, that is a purely aesthetic procedure. There's really no health benefit. You could argue that a dog with a long tail could be a happy tail, where they bang their tail against everything. But that's so few and far between that I don't know if there's a medical support for any of that in the long run. Maybe declawing, you could potentially say that because I have this disease, I need a cat that doesn't have claws.
Yeah.
But again, if you have a dog that has claws, it's the same basic principle. You could still trim them and probably benefit, or put the soft paws on and still get the same benefit out of it.
I would rather cut a cat's nails than a dog's. Now, I don't use nail trimmers.
Oh, absolutely.
Unless the nails are extremely long. I don't like to use nail trimmers. I use the Dremel. I find it less abrasive, and it works. And you don't quick. That's the other thing that really gets me. It takes longer. That's the only part that's the dead downfall. I think that's why a lot of groomers won't use it. Takes a little longer, but
well,
works.
And I'll be honest with you, I like the Dremel too. And the reason I do that is if you ever look at a nail trimmer, and I hate to say this because a lot of, this probably lumps a lot of places, whether it's a groomer or a veterinary clinic or whatever, but you use those same nail trimmers 100 times a day, right?
Yeah.
Those are not sharp. There's no way. When those clamp, there's a pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that whole nail is squeezed,
Mm-hmm.
and that's gotta hurt. Man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that a lot of dogs handle it really well, but watching that, even on my own dog, when I do nail trimming, and so, one, keep your nail trimmer sharp if you do that. But I honestly tell a lot of people early on is, try the Dremel. Your dog will love it. And we have a lot of dogs that come in that are, somewhat aggressive for nail trims, or they flail, or they hate it. And I'm like, no, don't use the trimmers, use the Dremel. And it's amazing what'll happen when a dog just lays there and that Dremel just rolls right over, because they don't feel a thing.
And it helps also when, again, elderly, whether it's male or female, an elderly person has a dog and you actually Dremel the nails, it doesn't tear their skin. I mean, it's smooth. With the regular nails, it's, regular trim, they're still going to have a sharp edge, and that's going to tear skin. So there's so many benefits to it. And, keeping it sharp, like you said, squeeze it. I've never liked it. And I don't know if you actually heard this premise, or methodology of maybe older groomers, but they always said that quicking, just a little bit. As long as you quick them a little bit, that way you know that you actually got all the nail. And I think to myself, why would you want to make the dog bleed?
Yeah, and it hurts. I mean, there's not a dog on the planet that doesn't react when that happens. And that's the cool thing about the Dremel is the heat cauterizes at the same time. So if you happen to hit that quick, it's still going to hurt a little bit, but it's not going to bleed. It's not going to cause nearly the amount of reaction. So yeah, it's a shame that petty paws thing didn't take off. I think it was just because they use a wrong motor. Most people could use just a regular Dremel they have at home and do a totally fine job of it. But I wonder if at some point in the future somebody should develop a better nail trimmer for dogs, not nail even trimmer, but like an actual Dremel. But again, I think that's the petty paws was a step in the direction of that. It just didn't work really well, at least in my experience.
Maybe that's just the next thing. Maybe that's the next step for, Pawfriction, Groomer Next Door, the come together and we come up with this. Maybe that's where we're at. That's next. Yeah, there you go. Let's keep going. We still got so much more to go, and I knew this was going to happen. I know that once we get on the phone, it's just we're like two chatty, off the world, and people are listening to this right now. Can you believe that people are listening to it? They're only waiting until their question comes up, and then they're like, "Okay, I'm out."
Right, they're fast forwarding. They're like, "Okay, skip a little bit."
Well, hey, a play is how I look at it.
Right.
My next question comes from a friend of ours. She asked, "My male cat is peeing on everything. I need suggestions on what to do." And it's from a friend called Jen.
Okay. Yeah, this is also a really common problem. So, there's a number of things that you can do that can help. The first thing that we always tell people is it's always worthwhile to make sure you rule out a medical cause for the urinary behavior. So a urinalysis, check the urine, make sure there's not white blood cells or potentially a stone or something along those lines, just to blanket rule it. And I'll be honest with you, you almost want to pray that there's a medical issue, because behavioral problems in cats can be exceedingly difficult to manage. And I'll put that blankety out there. So let's say you do the urinalysis and everything is clean, and your veterinarian comes in and says, well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the urine's clean. The bad news is that the urine's clean. So where do you go from here, right? So the very first thing that I always recommend is add a litter box. And we subscribe to the adage that you should always have one more litter box than you have cats. So if you have one cat, you should have two. If you have two cats, you should have three, and so on. And I tend to tell people to make that extra litter box a little bit different than the other one. And so if the other one's uncovered, do covered. You can make them out of Tupperware containers for $5. There's all kinds of stuff online for that. And put that other litter box in a different area. Just because a lot of times people don't realize we generally have like litter boxes in our laundry room, and the cat goes down in there and the washer kicks on and it freaks them out and they're never going to go back in that room again, And so putting one in a different area even potentially near where the cat is marking is not a bad idea in the short term. So that's option number one. Option number two is there is a litter box additive called Cat Attract. They make both an additive you can sprinkle into the litter, or they make a litter itself. I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what's in that stuff, but it works. I mean, I would say about 55 to 60% of the time, it draws them into using the litter box. Believe it or not, it's the weirdest thing, but it works reasonably well. And so that's kind of the way you deal with the litter boxes and things of that nature. Now, there's environmental treatments. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Feel Away diffusers. Pheromone therapy, which is what Feel Away is a really interesting thing. Basically, by emitting a certain pheromone, we can kind of get cats to calm down or to do things that we kind of want them to. So Feel Away is the product, and they have these diffusers that you plug into the wall that's supposed to emit a pheromone that calms them down. That's one of their products. The other product is a spray that you actually spray on the area that the cat is urinating. And it's supposed to repel them from doing so. And that works reasonably well also. And so those kind of pheromone therapy can work really well. And then from the medical side of things, I have used Prozac and amitriptyline in a lot of cats with urinary problems. And it has really, really, really helped their behavior. It's not a long-term management. Usually you do about 2 to 3 weeks, and that fixes the behavior. It's like, what is it? You need 2 to 3 weeks to unlearn a habit. And it's the same thing with cats. And you can generally retrain them that way as well. But the theory is that a lot of these cats do this because they're stressed. And what stresses out a cat? Literally everything on the planet. I had a cat one time that I went round and around with these poor owners for like 6 months trying to figure out what was going on. Every time we put the cat on medications, it would get better. As soon as it came off, it would go right to it. So we finally sat down, and it was like an hour worth of conversation where I was like, has anything changed in the house at all? And they said, well, we remodeled and we put a picture over the fireplace. And I was like, take that down. And sure enough, they took the darn picture down, and the cat was totally back to normal.
What's the picture of the previous cat?
No, it was just some random picture of flowers.
Wow.
Up there, cat, it was like it totally changed the cat's environment enough that it spiraled it out of control. So, and people will say male cats do it more than female. That's not true. Yeah. They actually will do it about the same. The other thing and the final thing that I have had some success with is canned foods, believe it or not. And I know it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but cats are desert animals. They don't drink enough water. Mm-hmm. Sometimes their urine gets exceedingly concentrated. So by increasing the amount of canned food, artificially increases the amount of water, which can cut down on cystitis or inflammation of the bladder and can fix a lot of problems that we deal with in cats. So that's another caveat to it. There's a website called the Indoor Cat Initiative that was done by the Ohio State University veterinary school that has got a lot of that stuff that I just talked about on it. So if you're furiously trying to write it down, you can just go to their website and they'll talk about a lot of that kind of stuff. But very common problem. We see it multiple times a week, and generally we can get it under control. You just got to go through some steps usually.
And Again, I've just played the vet on the podcast, so I'm going to ask you this question. So,
yeah,
again, like you said, they're always dehydrated. It seems like, with the canned food, it also cuts down. And again, quote me if I'm right. Please tell me if I'm right or wrong. And if I'm wrong, I won't be surprised. But UTIs.
Absolutely. Yeah, just by virtue of water. And that goes back to cats. Believe it or not, cats don't get urinary tract infections all that often. Dogs do. Cats actually get cystitis, which is just sterile inflammation of the bladder. They're actually the model for this disease in human women called interstitial cystitis. You would be amazed, and this is a conversation that we could literally have an entire podcast wrapped in nutrition probably. But the amount that we have learned about cats and nutrition, the feline specialists now are recommending that cats should be on pretty much predominantly canned food diets for a myriad of reasons. But just to briefly explain, it mimics their natural diets a lot better, increases water consumption, less carbohydrates. And doesn't cause them to get obese as easily.
Boy.
Yeah. So and people will argue, well, what about their teeth? Cats don't chew their food. If you've ever stepped on cat vomit, you know that.
Yeah.
It's just like wads of formed food because they're carnivores, right? Their teeth are meant for tearing and gulping.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. Watch your cat. It's sometimes treats they'll chew. It's the rare cat that will chew their food, but most of them swallow it whole.
Yeah, we were talking about that last week with having raw diet. They just go at it, and it's just it makes all the sense in the world to me. One thing I will add, and it's just this is the vet that I play on the podcast. We have one cat. She's the original cat here. She was left at this house when we first came here, and we just kept her. And she has a behavior issue. If a new cat, and it hasn't actually happened as of lately because she's so used to Grand Central Station for cats and dogs coming through. At the beginning, when we would bring in fosters, she would get really jealous, and she would pee on my side of the bed. And it was like, this is my human, back off. And I at the beginning did not realize that. And then I did some research, and then I started to notice that no cat can jump on the bed unless it's her daughter. Kind of weird. So something to take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much for a cat to kind of spiral out of control, and I feel for you with the behavior issues. I think trying a lot of that stuff generally has really good success. I recommend trying all the home stuff first. And then if that doesn't work, contact your vet and say, this is what's going on. I mean, check the urine.
I'm so glad.
One.
It's been years. It's been years since she's done it. So I'm really happy.
Yeah.
She's given up.
But after that, then try the home stuff. And if that doesn't work, generally, we do have medications that can absolutely help. But again, it's not a long-term solution. Yeah. It's usually just break the habit. They go back to normal. Everybody's happy and expect that at some point in their life, it will happen again because it usually does.
I would think that it's just even building up their immune system, like their immune system would almost kind of, just develop like, okay, I've now blocked that. Try something new.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
It really is.
Cats are just creatures all their own. They're absolutely unbelievable.
I don't think that there's a science to cats. I don't think there ever will.
No, there's not. Not at all.
All right. Well, we'll keep going. And you know what? I just looked at the clock, and I'm realizing that we're going to make this a 2-part. We'll keep going, but we're actually I'm going to split this into 2 episodes. Because we got a lot more to go, surprisingly. Because do we ever stop talking? I know I don't. If I would have stopped talking like 20 minutes ago, we would be all through this probably.
Right. And then we suckered all the people who their questions in the second half. They just listened through all the first one.
There he is. Now you'll have to tune in next week. So last question for this week's podcast. What's better to walk your dog with, a collar or a harness?
That depends on the dog. Small dogs, harnesses. Big dogs typically control collars. So they have the problem is that with dogs and their harness, like big dogs and harnesses, they can barrel chest their way out of it, and just literally like plow forward. Regular collars are not super great. I know they look horrible, but they have those gentle leaders that give you a little bit more control. There are these things called martingale collars, I believe is the name of them. That I'm not a big fan of the prong collars. I'll put that right out there, because I don't think that many people know how to use them appropriately, or they're not taught.
Agreed.
They're not meant to be a pressure thing. They're meant to be, and this always sounds horrible, but they're meant to be snapped. So they put like a tight bit of pressure, and that's supposed to be a training mechanism. And so small dogs absolutely harnesses for a myriad of reasons, and their health reasons, like collapsing trachea and things along those lines. I really recommend better control of collars in bigger dogs. And I hate them with a passion. Don't use flexi leads regularly. Just I have seen more fights because of flexi leads, because people aren't paying attention, and that dog jets before they can press that button to lock that flexi lead. We've had dog fights in our lobby. I've had dogs hit by cars. Because you're not paying attention. You're talking to somebody, and they just jet on you and they go. So I know they're super popular. Everybody loves them. Except veterinarians. There's no veterinarian on the planet that I know of that likes the flexi leads. So I just really tell people just a good, strong leash is better than anything.
I will actually say the funniest thing I ever saw, and it was funny because you should know better, but I felt bad after watching the video. This person was walking out. They had a kind of CCTV outside of their house, and you see them walk out. They had a Great Dane, and I'm going to take a guess it was a Shepherd, German Shepherd, and they had a flex lead, and they walk out. The Dane sees something, jumps off the porch. The Shepherd jumps off the porch and comes flying off the porch. Attached was the owner. That was my reaction. I felt bad for the owner because I know that they had to get hurt, but you should have known better.
Right, yeah.
It's rough enough you had a Dane, but you had a Shepherd and they're going to lunge. You're going to, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I would if we could get rid of them, I would be so happy. I know people like them because, it gives the dog a little bit more leeway, but a leash is better any day.
I mean, I like the harness, but, it really is, again, it's on the dog. Some dogs, they can pull right through that collar. They slip their head right through and bye-bye, they're off and running. The pit bulls that we have is like that.
Yeah, they're not dumb. They figure that out. So make sure your collars are tight. The rule of thumb is that you should be able to slide 2 fingers underneath it. And really no more than that. You don't want them hanging loose because we've had tons of dogs that have backed up and they back right out of that collar. They're not dumb. And like I said, the harness is for the small dogs only because, I think a lot of them have cervical issues. A lot of them get collapsing trachea. They get that cough as they get older, and they just seem to do better with the harnesses.
Agreed. I was lying when I said, we will have to do this in 2-part. We got 5 more questions. I think we can actually, get them through in the time we have.
I promise not to be long-winded.
No. This is all on me. I told you if I would just shut up, we would get through this a lot quicker. Hey, this podcast would probably be a 10-minute podcast if I didn't talk. So my next question is, how old does a kitten have to be before you can get it neutered?
Honestly, a lot of the rescue groups and humane societies do them as young as 4 weeks of age. I tell people that for me, it's more of a weight limit just because they seem to do better once they're over about 4 pounds. So I tell people that generally you want to do it somewhere around like the 4 to 5 month mark. The only thing you want to do is just make sure you get them done before that testosterone starts hitting. There's nothing worse on this planet than an intact male cat running around the house marking on everything. Because that urine smells horrible. It smells horrible. But thankfully neutering cats are a very straightforward procedure. It's very quick. So the anesthetic risks are quite a bit lower, but more than anything, we worry about hypothermia. Their temperatures drop pretty quickly. And seems to be that over 4 pounds, that doesn't happen as fast. So I usually tell people wait until about the 4 pound mark.
And now quote me on this, because this is what I've been hearing more often than not. That seems to be the new age rule. Wasn't it before like 7 weeks, 8 weeks was usually around the time that was normally normal?
8 to 12, I think, was when a lot of people did them. And I think that the other reason why a lot of people are waiting until 4 pounds is because generally that gets all your vaccines in as well. Because I think maybe it was happening where people were coming in for a neuter and then they never saw the cat again. And now we at least know that they've had the rabies one time, especially if they're an indoor-outdoor cat. So I think that that's another reason why a lot of people are waiting until, 4 pounds or more, which usually gets you about the 4 to 5 week or 4 to 5 month age. But yeah, we used to do them really young, about 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, I remember it being really young, really, really young. And I was like, wow, that is like they're barely on hard food. And I can understand where that would work, especially if it's a rescue group. You want to make sure that cat is spayed or neutered. But, like you're saying, there's definitely that age. You don't want to go too young and then cause so many different problems. And at that 8-week kind of barrier, they're still, again, asking you these questions, they're still unable to regulate their body temp at that age, or are they now able to regulate? Because
they can, they just don't have the fat stores. And that's the issue that we get into is that, under anesthesia, the thinner the dog is or the thinner the cat is, the quicker that they're going to lose weight. Not weight, but temperature. It's amazing how quickly an animal's body temperature will drop under anesthesia sometimes with small animals, whether that's a kitten or a chihuahua or whatever. I mean, sometimes, they go in at 1010, and by the time we're done with the procedure, it's maybe a 5-minute, 10-minute procedure. They're like 96 or 97 degrees. And that's with all the body, like the heat support, bear huggers, all that kind of stuff that we do with them. Their temperatures will drop really quickly like that.
That's really how long it takes to do a spay or neuter? I mean, I imagine a neuter is a lot quicker.
Neuter you about 30 to 45 seconds. Now in a cat. A dog, I would say about 8 to 10 minutes. A spay, probably about 15 to 20, depending on the size of the dog.
Man, I always wondered that.
And a cat spay, about 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's all dependent upon how many you've done in your career. Some people, it can take them 45 minutes to do a spay or a neuter, which is nothing wrong. They just haven't done a ton of them. The place that I practiced at originally, in my first year of practice, or first 2 years of practice, I'd probably done somewhere in the range of about 3,000 spays and neuters, I think.
Wow.
We did a ton of them. Yeah. So
I always wondered that question. I've never asked you that question.
I'm slow, compared to like the spay and neuters, in humane societies. I mean, those people are absolutely unbelievable with how fast they can spay and neuter an animal.
I've always said I remember there was one time local, they were looking for volunteers. Then they were going to be doing free spay and neuters. I forget the whole story, but it was probably for shelters or something. And they were asking for volunteers to come in and help. And I didn't do it. And I always said, I really should have done that. One day I think I'm just for the fun of it, just to be able to see it.
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing to see. People don't realize sometimes, and I guess we only have veterinarians to blame for this, but we use the word routine a lot. Spays are anything but routine. They're actually open abdominal procedures. I mean, you're going into the abdomen to get out the uterus. And there are complications that are associated with that. So we try to avoid, using the word routine. Even neuters can have complications. So I think it's always worth somebody to see. I'm sure there's videos online, but like just somebody see how that procedure is done. So, that they understand kind of what they're going through whenever they do it. We try to tell people whenever they do, but spays and neuters have been around for so long and it's such a common procedure that it gets thrown into that routine category when, unfortunately, it's anything but. It's an abdominal procedure.
Right. I think seeing everything instead of watching on YouTube, I like to see things up close and personal. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people do. All right. Next question to keep this bus moving. What are your thoughts? And I love this question. Before I even start, I love this question. What are your thoughts on keeping an FELV positive cat and a vaccinated negative cat together?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Right?
So I'm actually not as opposed to it as what you might think. The feline leukemia is an interesting virus in and of itself. It's not a pleasant thing to deal with. It's an oncogenic virus, so basically it induces cancer. It's amazing in that respect. But the vaccines and things like that we have are pretty darn protective against it. Certainly there's going to be a risk. The thing of it is that I don't think I would necessarily support bringing a cat into a home where you have an FeLV positive cat, even if that cat is necessarily vaccinated, unless that cat is over 7 years of age. And that's a really interesting thing about the virus. So cats have a protective immunity regardless of vaccine that comes on at about 6.5 to 7 years of age. It's the weirdest thing on the planet. We don't vaccinate many cats for FeLV after about 7 years of age. They tried to infect these cats when they were doing the studies, 50, 60 years ago, and could not get any cats to get infected over that 7-year mark. And so there seems to be a protective mechanism that develops in cats as they age. If you have 2 cats in the house and one of them does test positive for FeLV, I don't think you get rid of the other cat because they've already been exposed, right? I think you vaccinate that one and you go on. With that being said, I've had situations where people have had 4 and 5 cats and one of them tested positive and the other 4 were totally fine. They got vaccines regularly for the period of their life until they were about 7, and then everybody lived copacetic and never had any problems with it. So I'm actually not too opposed with it. I do think that maybe bringing one into a home where you have an FeLV positive cat, maybe playing with fire a little bit, but as long as you stay with the vaccines and that kind of thing, I think the vaccine has like a 98% success rate in protecting against the virus. So it's pretty impressive.
And what's funny is that cats have this almost their system is continuously repairing itself. And I think is that really kind of in a sense the FeLV kind of you said 7 years. If they're living in the same house together, almost developed an antidote in a sense to the virus.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's across the board. So even if you have a solitary cat in your house, and it's 8 years of age, let's say, and you decide, I'm going to bring a new kitten home, and that kitten ends up having FeLV, your older cat, even though has never been exposed to the vaccine or whatever, or exposed to the virus, will still have a protective immunity. It's the most unbelievable thing. And I don't think anybody can explain why exactly that is, or if they have, it's been researched since I looked it up last. But that's why all the vaccine protocols for cats have changed so dramatically. We used to vaccinate cats very often, like once a year. You get vaccines once every 3 years now, maybe, right. Depending on the age of the cat and things of that nature. So, and very few of them get that FeLV vaccine over that 7-year mark, even if they're outdoor cats. So pretty amazing.
It really is. I mean, cat, we've had a lot of cat questions and yet I think the cats have the most unique kind of scientific story to it, and that's why I think there's so many questions. I love reading about cats and the immune system and different things that are going on because it's just not like a dog. Dogs are more like us.
And I love the fact that this has been cat heavy because I think it reflects what's happening in veterinary medicine. It used to be for years and years. I mean, man, for the better part of the first 250 years of veterinary medicine, that cats were pretty ignored.
Yeah.
They were given a vaccine now and again or things like that. And I don't know, it's been within the last maybe 5 to 7 years that we've seen this dynamic switch in the cats, really like the care is being done and the research is being done. And maybe it's happened longer than that, but it really seems like now, when I first started at the hospital here, maybe 25% of my appointments were cats. Now I would say it's easily 50-50, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. To go from, that's our cat, it just roams around the house and we put some food out and that's clean the litter box on occasion too. Yeah, now they have, they're just integral parts of the family, and I think that's really cool. Cats, unfortunately, hide things very well, and that is a very difficult challenge for a lot of veterinarians, myself included, that, cats aren't sick until they're really sick.
Right.
And that's just an ingrained problem, an ingrained thing in them because, again, they're carnivores and you show a weakness and you're picked off. So they're a challenge for a lot of veterinarians. And one of the things I always tell people is that, you really need to get regular checkups on your cat for no more reason than to check the weight. The single most important thing that you get when you go to your veterinary clinic is you get a weight history, because weight loss in cats is almost universally associated with a problem. Mm-hmm. Whether that problem is easily fixed with a change of the diet, or it's something more serious like thyroid disease or things along those lines. I come in all the time and I walk in and they're like, Dr. Bone, you're going to be so happy. My cat's lost a pound. And I'm like, okay, we got to do blood work. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't ever want to discount it. But it's exceedingly difficult to get cats to lose weight. And when they do start losing weight, especially older, our red flag goes off.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm with you. I never see cats lose weight. If they do, yeah, you're right. As I'm thinking back, I'm looking back on any cat that I've ever had. It's like, yeah, you're right. They lose weight. That's it. That's the telltale sign right there.
Yeah. But if we can catch that, that's the first thing that changes. And if we can catch that, we have so much better success in managing their diseases. That I think that's the reason why it's worth going to your vet yearly, and making sure that when you go there, which I can't think of a veterinary clinic that wouldn't, but make sure that they get the weight.
Right.
I think that's invaluable.
And you can tell. You can really tell when your cat's lost weight. You can tell. Because they don't just, it's not like, she's got her summer look going. No, you know.
Right.
So here's one I have a feeling came from our previous episode. What's your stance? And again, I told you about this before, and it's going to be kind of one of those weird curveballs. So obviously, like I said, if you don't have any kind of stance and facts aren't in yet, or whatever your opinion is, let me know. Well, what's your stance on cats and dogs having a raw diet?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, that's changing a lot as time goes on. And I think that this falls into that category of, opinions kind of have their best by date. I am not a veterinarian that is opposed to raw diets, but I think that they need to be approached with cautious stances, meaning that you take some risks when you do raw food, particularly with the storage aspects and things like that, but also realize that while doing a raw diet satisfies a lot of the nutritional requirements and things of that nature, what really is important is the ratios of those, like let's say calcium and phosphorus, for instance. There's an actual ideal ratio that needs to be done with those in order to make sure your kidneys are working appropriately and all that kind of stuff. So when doing a raw diet, the one thing that I kind of recommend to people, if I have clients that approach me and they're like, I'm going to say this and you're going to think I'm crazy, but they're like, we're interested in putting our dog on a raw diet, I don't just shut them down and say, well, that's dumb.
Right. No,
I actually embrace that, because when done correctly, I think it can fix a lot of problems. We've had a lot of animals that have improved on raw diets when those diets were formulated by a veterinary nutritionist. And there's even some things online now, again, like, I'm not going to remember the names of the websites and things like that. I feel like the one that comes right at the top of mind is maybe called Balance It, which is a website that's devoted to, it's got like a powder that I think you sprinkle on the food that gets all those nutrients in the ratios that you need. But there are veterinary nutritionists. There are a lot of good online resources that have actually done that work for you. If you want to try a raw diet because, skin issues or intestinal problems or things like that, I'm not opposed to it, but I think it needs to be done correctly. And I think as time moves forward, we're going to find more and more and more information. So we may table it and say, let's discuss this in the future when more stuff has come about what this is. We were talking about the pet fooled, and like I said, I haven't seen it yet, but I really want to. But I think as more and more investigation is done into the sides of the pet food industry and stuff like that, we may see a lot of this stuff start to change.
Right. And like I said, I've kind of covered the crud out of the whole, idea of loving the movie, having one of the people on, having, director having one of the vets on, and the vet that they actually support with was Darwin that we had on last week, really covering every bit of it just to do that research. But, again, I'm kind of for it, just to see if it works in the allergy side. But I also believe, and tell me again, quote me if I'm wrong on this one, or what, or even say nothing. But I think that your dog's needs are the biggest priority, and obviously the nutrition is the look. We've got to do a nutrition episode at some point. Even though I've done a million of them, it seems like. But I think that your dog's needs and maybe its medical issues will be the criteria for it. I don't think that it's good for every dog.
No. Well, and there's some, there's a couple of companies, and you guys may have covered this, and I may just be, sticking my neck out there if you guys have already talked about this, but there's like Nature's Variety and things like that, and Stella and Chewy's, I think is the name of one of the companies. They actually pasteurize their product. They sell raw diets, formulated raw diets, but they do pasteurize that. And so if you're ever interested in trying a raw diet, but you want to go the more safe routes, that might be an option for people because they do like freeze-dried raw diets and patties and things like that. And they're all, the AAFCO, which is the food administration that we use. A lot of times they want to make sure that they're pasteurized. And I think those are like the only two companies that really do it. I mean, certainly there's some benefit to making this stuff at home, but that's kind of a pain. I mean, if anybody's ever done that, I talk to clients all the time that cook for their dogs, and they're like, I'm so tired of doing this. Even, boiled chicken and white rice, for when your dog has GI problems, they hate doing. So maybe looking into some of those might be an option too if you're interested in potentially trying it. My brother actually put his dog on Nature's Variety, Duck, if I remember right, because the dog had horrible skin problems, and it worked beautifully. So I don't discount any of that. I'm not, that person who come on here and be like, I can't believe we're talking about raw diet again. Because I think that there's a place for all of that stuff. I really, and I think that there will be more so as we examine this in the future.
Agreed. We got two left. I think my dog suffers from anxiety. She hates strangers and will try to bite them. She shakes, and I don't think she is happy. We've had her and her sister since they were 12 weeks old. They are now 7 years old. Her sister is perfectly happy. When do I know if my dog needs medication?
Yeah, and that's the answer to that. When do you know when your dog needs medication? I think is you rely on a professional. The anxiety, and not even so much just anxiety. We deal with tons of anxiety in veterinary medicine, storm anxiety and separation anxiety and car anxiety and all that kind of stuff. But I always worry about the aggressive stuff. And actually, and I love this because this was talked to me about a trainer a long time ago, but he and I were talking, and I said, what do you do about all this? And he goes, 9 times out of 10, the issue is not anxiety, it's confidence. These dogs are terrified, and they're not anxious. They're not anxious about being out into the world. They may have a degree of anxiety, but in reality, they're afraid. And out of fear is when they oftentimes bite. And he's one of those people that's referred to by a lot of people to fix problems and stuff like that. They actually do confidence building as part of the training profile. And I tell people that, there's no shame in taking your dog to a trainer to get this stuff worked out, because it's hard for us as pet owners to fix these problems. Mm-hmm. Let's do walking, for instance, right? So you walk your dog and you're terrified your dog's going to bite somebody. So what happens? You're walking down the street and another 2 people come ahead of you. What you instantly do is you wrap that leash and you pull tight. And the dog senses that, right? And says to himself, okay, what's going on here? This is weird. You know, and immediately they're on high alert. Well, if they're already keyed up because they're anxious or because they're afraid, that immediately puts them into that defensive stance. And we do that sometimes without even knowing it, because it happened one time that somebody bent down to pet our dog and they tried to bite. And we're not going to take any chances, right? So at 7 years of age, you would hope that this dog has a long, healthy life in front of it. So I would employ the use of a trainer before I jump to medications. Now, there are many, many, many cases where medications have helped dogs out tremendously. And we use them all. We use Xanax and Prozac and Paxil and Trazodone, and I mean, you name them, we use them all. But the thing of it is that just putting your dog on medications doesn't do anything. You have to counter condition at the same time, because the ultimate goal is to get them off those medications.
Right.
So if you do the training and the work during those periods of time, it's really valuable. But I think a lot of times people are afraid, like they're afraid to take their dog to the trainer because they think of it as this is a failure kind of thing. That, you know, why is one dog out of the pair here totally normal and the other dog is trying to attack people, you know, when in reality something has happened. That dog is afraid or has anxiety or something that can be fixed with just a little bit of work. It's amazing sometimes to me how quickly these people can fix these problems with just the teeniest amount of work. It's unbelievable.
I actually thought that we would have our first kind of disagreement. I was going to go with training. That's exactly where I was going to go. I thought you were going to say, you know, a Xanax might work the best, and I was going to be like, well, you know, it does work, but so I was like, oh, he's gonna go down that direction. So see, look at that. I have nothing to add because you added it.
Yeah, we don't, you know, none of us veterinarians or anybody get a joy out of having to put a dog on medication, especially when that's a fear and anxiety. You know, storm anxiety, that's a little bit different. That's
right.
An isolated thing. The thunder starts booming, and the dog is terrified. Or car anxiety, dogs are never meant to ride in cars. We understand why they're afraid of that. But this kind of thing particularly responds beautifully sometimes to training and confidence building. And I've seen it time and time again. So I'll be honest with you. I don't think your dog is in pain. I don't think it's suffering. I would argue that it's probably not even anxious. It's probably more afraid because it's lashing out. It's doing that protective instinct against you or protecting you and protecting itself.
Totally agree. I have nothing to add. All right. Well, we are on to our last one. And luckily, I was like, okay, we're still good on time. All right, last question. Now, I told you this one's actually come from Tasmania. So I wanted to save this one for last. And it's a little bit on a longer one. And I really enjoyed this. So we may actually have an answer for this. Well, you may have an answer for this. I'm just listening to you. So let me rephrase that. My Akita pup suffers from environmental allergies, which we can relate to because our Akita has the same problem. I have combated it with the basic treatments like supplements, antihistamines, antibiotics, eye drops, etc. And more effective treatments like, and I'm so bad at words, and this is why you're the vet, it's Apoquel, I think?
Apoquel.
There you go. But there are a few articles about the whole approach to managing allergies. What foods are most effective? What supplements actually help? And what can I do for my poor dog's eyes as they are often very swollen and weepy? I'm finding it really frustrating and upsetting thinking that drugs are the only relief my pet will get. And I'm on my own trying to manage this.
Yeah, man, how much time do we have left?
Probably not to cover all of it.
Yeah. So you are dealing with one of the single, probably one, frustrating diseases out there, and two, one of the most complicated diseases out there. It probably is a reason why it's so frustrating. So And just to kind of, I guess for the rest of the audience to explain kind of what we're up against here, there's two types of allergies in veterinary medicine, and I'll just kind of refer to these as atopy, which is topical, so atopic disease, or food allergies, right? And the numbers have probably changed since I've been in school, but I'm going to briefly run down the numbers that I know. But of the dogs that have one or the other, okay, so if you have a dog that has food allergies, or you have a dog that has atopy, it's about 64-ish, 65% of those dogs will also have a degree of the other. So the food question is a really valuable one. If you have a dog with topical allergies, addressing the food can make a difference with that. The thing it is in veterinary medicine, the word food allergies is thrown around a lot, but that's a bit of a misnomer, actually. In reality, it's more food sensitivities. It's a sensitivity to either the protein or the carbohydrate source. And I'm sure you guys kind of talked about all this previously, but and we won't delve into it too much. But typically the 5 most common things that dogs are allergic to, maybe 6 depending on who you talk to. So it's beef, chicken, soy, wheat, and corn. Okay. Salmon is in the mix there, and pork is in the mix there as well. Now, of the foods that we recommend, there's kind of 3 different levels of this. So there is over-the-counter limited ingredient / novel protein diets. So that's tier number 1. And basically a limited ingredient diet is a diet that's made with only one protein and typically one carbohydrate source. And we call them novel protein diets because they're made with a protein that the body has never seen before. And there's tons of these out there. They're made with things like duck and rabbit and venison and kangaroo and catfish and all these proteins that there's no way a dog has ever gotten a hold of before. So switching the diet to one of those could be beneficial. There's no question of it. Tier number 2 is a prescription novel protein diet. Now, the only difference between those and tier number 1 is that typically the diets in tier number 2 are made in a plant that's dedicated specifically for that diet. So, whenever you buy like a candy bar and it says made in a facility that uses peanuts, it's that same thing. So a lot of these over-the-counter diets are made in huge facilities where there could be counter contamination from another protein source. Okay. And then the third tier of this is what's called a hydrolyzed or hypoallergenic diet. These are diets that we typically use to diagnose food issues, but the science behind them, to put it as plainly as possible, they found that if you superheat the protein, you can break the chains, and those chains then no longer cause an allergic reaction in the dog. Okay. And so I tell people that when you're trying to manage a dog that has allergies, always change the diet. It's not going to hurt anything, even if we don't think that the diet is what's causing the problem. Face and feet and sides are typically topical allergies. Ears and rears are typically food allergies, so chronic ear infections or rear end issues like diarrhea or anal sac problems or things along those lines. I would say first off, just try an over-the-counter novel protein diet and see how that works for you. There's tons of them out there. They're very easy to obtain right now, and shouldn't be difficult. And if we do suspect that the food is more of an issue, then maybe going to one of the prescription diets is worthwhile if we want to try to get a diagnosis. So that kind of covers the diet side of things. Treating allergies is a frustrating thing. And it sounds like you guys have really run the gambit of the medications that we use. Apoquel is new. Apoquel has been out for about a year and a half. And it kind of works similar to how steroids work to control allergies, just a different mechanism and safer long term. So in many dogs, they're using Apoquel long term as an option. There's a newer treatment that just came out actually the end of last year that's an injection. That's called, what is it? They changed the name. It's called Cytopoint. It's a antibody injection, which is really, really, really cool. Antibody injections we've used in human medicine for decades and decades and decades, and they're totally safe. And basically what you do is you give an injection, and it puts antibodies into the system that bind the allergy before it can ever get to the cell. And it's a more effective option, and it has no side effects. So that's one option of something that you could try. The other thing that people have used with mixed degrees of success are allergy injections. And those are typically done by a veterinary dermatologist, where they test you for all the allergens, right? And they say, well, you're allergic to oak and grass and this kind of dust mite. And they put together the injections like they do in people, and you give injections over the course of months to a year in the hope that you can sensitize the body for that. I'm sure tons of your listeners have had allergy injections as kids or whatnot.
I did.
Yeah. So the problem is it's what we call the rule of thirds. So a third of dogs it will do nothing for them. A third of dogs get relief, but they still have to be managed with some other form of medication. And a third of dogs will respond beautifully to it, and essentially have no allergies anymore. So you kind of roll the dice with that. Those aren't great odds for something that has a tendency to maybe get a little bit expensive sometimes. If you're doing allergy testing on your dog, I tend to recommend the skin allergy testing and not the blood. The blood will work in a pinch, but the skin allergy testing is a better result, at least the studies have shown us. So that covers the medical side of things. Now, a few things that can help. Antihistamines are great. Benadryl is not good. We don't typically recommend Benadryl. We usually go to Zyrtec or Claritin, or, we're starting to use Allegra and things like that. Benadryl, you have to give about 4 times a day to make a difference. Zyrtec, you can get away with twice a day. You just have to make sure you don't use Zyrtec D. But there's a lot of supplements that are out there. The big supplement right now that is making a really strong push to be one of the best medications we've used in allergies for a long time is a product called Dermoscent, which is DERMOSCENT, and it's a topical treatment, and it does a beautiful job of restoring the skin barrier and protecting against allergies. So it's a mix of a ton of different holistic products, and the dermatologists all over are recommending it now for animals. Any animal that's had a chronic condition is definitely a candidate for it. The omega-3s are beautiful. Any omega-3 usage like fish oil and stuff like that can help out beautifully. But unfortunately, a lot of your holistic stuff is not going to work really great until you get the inflammatory response calmed down. And so I feel ya. I know the allergy stuff is super, super difficult to deal with. There are some new, better treatments on the horizon that aren't medications that you could certainly talk to your veterinarian about that might be an option, of something that you could maybe do to get off the medications, because you're right. I mean, prednisone has horrible side effects, and, even Apoquel is not 100% safe long-term. It's been shown to have some bone marrow issues and things like that. The new injections seem to be a little bit safer, with the Cytopoints and that kind of thing that's coming out. So getting better and better at managing it. But, the key is to figure out how to get that immune system calmed down. So that's the short response to that. The long response, we could go on for hours, to be honest with you. But I think that answers most of it. Shampoos are great. Any of the cortisone-based shampoos will work really well. If you're going to use a shampoo, I would say definitely always follow up with a very good conditioner. There used to be a product on the market called Resicort, which was a conditioner that you could purchase that had hydrocortisone in it. And we had a lot of dogs that did very well with that also.
And that's this week's podcast, folks.
Yeah.
I mean,
we'll talk about that some other day.
What's funny is I didn't think we would actually, pull off this type of episode. When you came to me and said, "Hey, let's do a mailbag," I'm like, "Oh, that didn't work out so well," but it worked out great. I mean, we literally pulled an entire episode. I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
So,
great questions, though. You had awesome questions.
Very good questions. Well, folks, this was Dr. Stacey Bone on the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoy it. So
we'll
do this again soon.
You're coming back. You will.
Okay, gotta go in my bed.